Welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, bringing you guys four more topics to talk about on today's episode in regards to more Cowboys news and just storylines around the NFL. The first one I'll get into will be around the new Chargers defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, and what his strategy is to unlocking the full potential of that Chargers defense. Later on, I'll talk about the Stefon Diggs trade rumors and Bills GM coming out and sort of debunking those, wiping those away and saying why they wouldn't trade him, and I'll give you some reasons why they might want to trade him. Later on in the show, I'll recap everything that went down on the franchise tag deadline yesterday. There was a lot of players tagged, a lot of surprising players that weren't tagged, and some re-signs and other players that are going to hit the market and their potential impact. Before I wrap it all up with the story on the Cowboys again, this time Dak Prescott finally speaking to the media and giving his answer on why he feels attacked in some way by the media on the criticism that his team is receiving. All that coming up on today's episode. Before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have during the show. The tip and donations link is running across the ticker down below me. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. And if you're only listening to this episode, the link again is gsmcpodcast.net. This makes sure I'm able to see your questions in the chat box right away and can read them on air. It's also a big help for the show and all the other shows across the networks for you guys to use the link and just engage with us. It makes it more fun, and we always appreciate it every time anyone's able to do that with any question or comment that you guys may have. But in saying that, I'm able to move into the chip shot story as always, kicking off the show. This time around the Los Angeles Chargers, they were also pretty active, one of the more active teams this offseason. They've made a lot of releases. Obviously, the big news is them bringing in Jim Harbaugh. But they also brought in Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator at Michigan with Harbaugh. He came over to the Chargers, and now he'll have the task of trying to unlock this Chargers defense that has very good players on it, but hasn't lived up to that reputation, that standard that having these sort of players comes with. He's basically, plain and simple, he's trying to use a system to get the best out of his star players, which is what every Chargers fan wants to hear. But in particular, Jesse Minter zoned in on Derwin James, wanted to get the best out of Derwin James. And he says he's looking forward to deploying Derwin James in that versatile role in various different systems, schemes that he has planned out to get the best out of Derwin James and for him to step more into that leadership, sort of Swiss Army knife, X-Factor defensive player that I'm sure everyone believes and knew that Derwin James could be coming out of Florida State. And just some comments that Jesse Minter made, really to group this all in together into one thought, is he said, "I'm really, really excited about Derwin, and I've gotten a chance to get to know him a little bit. Just an unbelievable person, an unbelievable leader. The type of mindset that we want to have here on defense is really kind of how he plays already. I'm excited just to sort of try to unleash Derwin James." And, he went on to say he could do much more with him and the players around him. But he also made sure to preface it in saying that a lot of times coaches, when they have so many star players, maybe one in particular, they try to get them to do too much, overdoing their versatility and trying them in different roles where they might not excel or in different positions where they might not have played before. But because they're so good, so agile in skill set, they'll try him everywhere. And I think that's where he kind of toes the line, or he'll try to toe the line, I should say, in trying to unlock Derwin James, because Derwin James, coming out of Florida State, was a very highly touted safety, has great size to him, he has great ball skills, and he's coming off of a pretty down season for his standards, just based on what we've already seen from him, the kind of player that he can be in his first couple years. Last year, much like the rest of the Chargers, defensively, they weren't very good. They had a lot of big names: Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Derwin James, Asante Samuel too, to some extent as well. And they just lacked any sort of big play, crucial third down stop, turnover on downs, whatever the scenario may be. They lacked those kind of moments in big games where you saw them lose a lot of those big games and maybe give up leads. Their offense wasn't able to stay on the field, and now their defense is tired and performing to less of what they're expected to. And all of that just wraps into a poor season. And Derwin James, being one of the more talented players, is going to be highlighted, especially after he was coming off back-to-back seasons of making the Pro Bowl. He just lacked that sort of spark. Really, that whole defense lacked that energy. And there could be some factors into that, not trusting in the offense, being too tired, just over and over of seeing your defense not being able to stop someone can get to you mentally. Could be one reason why, after a while, that defense kind of loses its spark, its energy. But that's what Jesse Minter has been brought in to do. Get the best out of these players, Derwin James especially, because personally I really like Derwin James. I was a big fan of him coming out of Florida State. And if they could unlock him, I know they have other questions elsewhere with Khalil Mack. Is he going to get traded or released? They got to figure out their cap space with four of their best players: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joey Bosa, and Mack, as I mentioned. But if you're able to keep Derwin James, I think Derwin James does enough for this defense that it might not be a top 5, top 10 defense right away. It might take a season even, but having Derwin James be the catalyst of it all, a sort of, just Ed Reed-ish kind of leader. I'm not saying he's Ed Reed as of now, but having that kind of voice back there, a quarterback of the defense, if you will, back there, controlling everything, will not only make this defense look a lot better and a lot more organized, but it'll make the job easier for Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter, who are both new to this Chargers team, back into the NFL. And it'll definitely take some time, but I like the fact that, Jesse Minter came out and pointed out to some players that he expects a lot more out of, and he is trying to get the best out of them because he expects it to lead to a lot of success. Is Derwin James the right piece to build around? I would say so, just to allude back to what I was saying. Building around the safety, and I think a good linebacker makes it a lot easier because they're able to organize everything and make sure the coverages on the back end are tight. Everyone's where they're supposed to be, as opposed to having one really good defensive lineman, a D-end, a rusher of some sorts. It makes it easier just because you could have the quarterback hold the ball longer, and it makes the defensive end's jobs a little bit easier if on the back end it's all organized and it's all well put together, as opposed to, as a pass rusher, getting there very quick, but the coverage isn't well. Someone's not where they're supposed to be. There's a lot of miscommunications, and then you get a lot of big plays, and the pass rushers in turn get frustrated because they're getting there quick, but they're not getting anywhere near the quarterback. And that's why I think having a guy like Derwin James, who not only is really a deep safety, he can play in the box, almost like a dime linebacker, or in any coverage they want to line him up in. He has so much versatility that you could really explore what you want to do with him, but finding that one area where he really excels in, I think, is what Jesse Minter is trying to do in his time already getting to know Derwin James, but more so going into training camp and preseason, and then even during the season, because this is definitely going to take some time. Just in terms of the defense overall, I think they're going to really try and hone in on the defensive side of the ball, because offensively, they don't really need too much. With the running back market of how it is, yeah, you lost Austin Eckler, but you could re-sign him if both parties are up for that. But in the same breath, you could get another running back probably for the same amount of money and potentially cheaper They could go for Saquon, but I think he's going to be too expensive for them with their cap. Derrick Henry potentially for a year or two. He could give you more production just because he's been more relevant, at least last season, than Austin Eckler. But even, I don't know, a Tony Pollard or DeAndre Swift could be interesting as well because he had a good season with the Eagles, but they obviously didn't re-sign him. And now he's going to be a free agent. I think that would be a good fit for the Chargers as well because he could catch the ball. He's very agile, like Austin Eckler, but he's a bit more nimble and a bit more versatile in the passing game compared to Austin Eckler. And just to wrap it all up, I think this defense is definitely going to take some work, but seeing what Jim Harbaugh did at Michigan, the kind of defense that they had, building up from the D-line and then so forth, the linebackers and the safety, he might have to work a little bit backwards here with Derwin James being the focal point, but you still have Joey Bosa there, and even if you don't have Khalil Mack, you could still draft somebody or find other free agents out there that could generate you a pass rush. Your defensive tackle position hasn't been the best. They could go and try and negotiate something for Christian Wilkins or a player like that, but I think they have the pieces there, and I think Jim Harbaugh is excited to work with them. And because it's defensively built, or he's defensive-minded, more so than offense, I think it would be a good point for him to start with this defense because if he could get the defense right, he already has the franchise quarterback, Keenan Allen, and just a decent enough offense to work with where you don't have to be putting up 25 points per game to improve from what you did last year. I think that's the main goal, just improving on last year. It's not going to be that hard, I don't think, because I think they were 4-13 if my memory serves me right. So if he could get more out of Justin Herbert, make this defense look better, I think everyone is going to fall in love more with Jim Harbaugh than they already are excited for him as soon as he walked back in through that door. But we're going to leave it at that. The comments were interesting from Jesse Minter to point out the players, and I'm very fascinated to see where he takes his team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to move on with the show. We're going to go into a quick break right now, but on the other side of that break, don't go anywhere because the story on Dak Prescott and how he feels attacked by the recent comments on the Cowboys culture is coming up towards the end of the show, as well as where the Bills stand and what are all the trade rumors about Stefon Diggs about? Are there any truth to them? And how some news that actually broke today could influence that trade potentially for Stefon Diggs. All that and more coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Jumping into the next story, or before that, if you missed the first segment, I talked about the Chargers' new defensive coordinator and his thoughts on the defense and what player specifically he wanted to help reach his full potential. Now, jumping into the next segment of the show, the Buffalo Bills, in general, Stefon Diggs. Now, the Bills are one of those teams, playoff contending teams. They'll continue to be that as long as Josh Allen is there. He has cemented himself as a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. There's some debate on others. He's in the top 7. I'll give 7 if there's some other debate out there. But regardless, he is a generational type of talent. Physically, he's a fridge, basically, the way he's built, the way he can run the ball at his size. He's a more athletic Big Ben, and because of that, he has brought the Buffalo Bills to the point of, always being around the AFC divisional round, always making the playoffs. They always have a chance with Josh Allen. And what does Josh Allen need to succeed? A wide receiver 1, which has been Stefon Diggs up to this point, the majority of his career. They've had a lot of success together. They are really the catalyst, or have been the catalyst for this offense. But now the Bills find themselves in a difficult spot with their salary cap, where they're going to have to make some tough decisions. And some of those decisions actually came today. Just before I jumped on to the air to do the show today, I saw that they made a lot of cuts, mostly with their defense and their offense as well. They cut their longtime corner, Tre'Davious White. They released their longtime safety, Jordan Poyer. Micah Hyde was also already going to be a free agent, so both starting safeties have been cut. They also released their starting center, Mitch Morse, wide receiver, Deontay Hardy, and running back, Naheem Hines. All of that to try and realign their cap space and get under the cap before the new league year starts. And that was obviously a tough blow, but they had to make some decisions because they had to get under that salary cap. And it brings me to now this point where all the trade rumors start to swirl. Some people might value their defense more than their offense, specifically how they were trending towards last season. I thought, just from watching a lot of their games leading up to the playoffs, that they were becoming a more run-heavy team. They were relying a lot more on the tight end position, and a lot of dump-offs, a lot of read options. Josh really not taking the big, risky throws downfield to Diggs a lot of times, but rather checking it down, finding the easier options through James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, and Stefon Diggs, don't get me wrong, was still involved. But a stat that I just found interesting was that with Stefon Diggs and his production over last season, it sort of dropped in a bit, where in some areas he almost had the same amount of targets, but the depth of those targets reduced a fair amount. It went from 11.2, the depth that he ran his route at, and it dropped to about 10.3 as the season went on. His yards per game also went down from 89 per game to 70 yards per game, and that led into some pretty bad performances offensively from the Bills. Josh trying to force it into Stefon Diggs, and Stefon Diggs, you could say, wasn't getting open as easily as he once was. He is getting closer to 30 now, if he's not already there. So that sort of development, physical development in his game, has kind of affected how he is as a wide receiver, how much he can contribute compared to Kincaid, James Cook, who are all young and are more physically able to do the sort of things that the Bills kind of were trending to in the run game. And Stefon Diggs will always have the support of Josh Allen. But when you see the drop in performances, drop in stats like that, these rumors will start to build up a lot more. And, on top of that, Gabe Davis, who was another wide receiver for them, he is looking more and more likely to leave the Buffalo Bills as well because of that salary cap. He's only still 25 years old, so he could get a decent deal somewhere else. And it just really didn't make sense for him to stay there. We'd rather look out for, his personal benefit, look for the money elsewhere, and still be on a competitive team as well. He didn't perform as well as he did last year, but that was in part due to injury and stuff like that. So we'll see what kind of contract Gabe Davis gets. But back on Stefon Diggs, it now puts you in this weird spot with Diggs where you're going to lose Gabe Davis. I already mentioned the other offensive players they lost. They're still not under the cap, I believe, at this moment. But they could certainly be if they trade Stephon Diggs, but you're now in this place where do you trade him, and then what wide receivers are you left with? Both when I wrote the notes down for this, when I was going to make this one of the topics on today's show, they hadn't done any of those cuts, so a Stephon Diggs trade looked a lot more realistic at that point because, defensively, did you want to risk that? Do you want to potentially give Stephon Diggs up based on the trend that he's been on in a lot of reduction of yards per game, depth of targets, and stuff like that? Did it seem reasonable to give him up? Bills general manager, Brandon Beane, didn't think so. At the combine, he said, yeah, I expect him, that being Diggs, to be here. In a simple response to all these trade rumors, Brandon Beane said he expects Diggs to be here. And after these cuts, it only backs that up even more and more. But, like I mentioned, they're still not under the cap. And if they were to trade Stephon Diggs for those cap allegations or that cap alleviation, with a standard trade of Diggs, the Bills could carry nearly a $30 million cap charge, over $3 million more than it would cost to keep him if they were just to trade him regularly. So that from that point, it doesn't really make sense to trade him, which is probably the biggest reason why the Bills didn't trade him. Because if it was just a normal trade like that, they would carry more money than it would cost to keep him. The other scenario that could have popped up was if they released him after June 1st, like they did with Tre'Davious White. They'd get stuck with a $22 million cap charge, but that would be in 2025, and they would save about $19 million this year if they needed the money desperately this year, which was probably going to be the more likely scenario, but they decided to take that route with Tre'Davious White. Now he's gone, and he's able to sign somewhere else. He's coming off of 2 knee injuries. It's going to be tough for anybody to give him a big contract, but I still believe he can contribute something to a defense elsewhere, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes. But with that, on top of the other releases, Stephon Diggs staying with the Bills seems more and more likely than it did before. And at this point, with everything that I just said, it looks like Stephon Diggs is going to get another chance in Buffalo. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but you'll have a lot of people saying in a lot of games, if the Bills don't perform well, or if they're not having the kind of numbers that they have had in the past, why they're going to start raising questions about why Stephon Diggs is still there, quite frankly, and why he's not performing up to the amount of money that he's getting paid. And that all depends on their results. Those results could depend greatly on the releases that they had. If they don't compensate for replacing those guys, very meaningful and impactful guys, not just in terms of on the field, but off the field as well. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, the essential leaders of this team on the defensive side and overall. Now you're going to have to find new voices, new leadership. Potentially it could fall on Josh Allen more. I don't know how much he stepped into that leadership role, but Stephon Diggs is also another one that could take up that voice in the locker room and be that leader. But you have to wait and see how it all gels. That's the biggest part of the NFL season, how all the pieces to the puzzle fit together, what kind of moves you make to build this roster that you see potentially competing into January and February. And just on that note, he's still, Stephon Diggs, going back to Stephon Diggs, he still garners wide receiver 1 targets, but he's getting them on shorter routes now and with less, and doing less with them as well, according to a lot of statistics and reports that I saw on ESPN and from a lot of different sources. So how do you fix that? I've listed out all these issues potentially with Stephon Diggs. How do you fix it? If I'm thinking about it, it all has to play into the kind of identity that they're trying to build into now. With them being a bit more run heavy, a lot of teams are going to start to pile the box, get a lot more people in there to stop James Cook, to stop Josh Allen especially from those QB sneaks or those read options. you're going to have a lot more people condensed in there, and that way it could open up the field a little bit more for Stefon Diggs. Yeah, it might take away from his targets, and we might see a little bit more decrease, but I think the efficiency of that production from Stefon Diggs will grow greatly rather than throwing him 10 targets, having him catch about 4 of them, have 60 or 70 yards and no touchdowns. I think those numbers say a lot more and a lot more eye-catching than maybe 5 catches on 5 targets, 70 to 80 yards on play-action throws, longer ones with one-on-one coverage, and a touchdown. It might not look a little different, but I think a lot of people would take that over the other side of it if it means winning games, controlling the ball, the possession of the ball, and being more efficient with what you do with Stefon Diggs rather than just force-feeding him ball after ball after ball and hoping he does something with it. If they're just going to double-team him, that's another thing. They were still more likely double-teaming Stefon Diggs, and he wasn't able to get open in that. And with Josh Allen force-feeding him the ball, it led to interceptions, bad throws, and a lot of miscommunication, frustration spilling onto the sideline. All of that, I think, if I were to fix it, I would decrease the quantity of the targets and try to increase the quality of it to benefit not only Diggs, but this entire team. And again, now you're in a spot where you already made the decisions to move on from your defensive stalwarts, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White, resetting on defense. Now we're just at a wait-and-see point. Realistically, was it worth it to keep Stefon Diggs and the offensive side of the ball basically all together and give up some of that defensive side of the ball? Because I think recently the Bills have been very well organized on defense. They've been known for their defense a lot recently, and it's going to look very different now, and I'm very interested to see how they play off of that, how the offense potentially gets better and now becomes the identity a lot more than the defensive side of the ball. It'll put more pressure on Josh Allen for sure and Diggs to perform, but that's just going to come with the repetition and getting everybody acclimated to each other and this new style, which I think benefits them more because you have to take advantage of Josh Allen's physicality, his build, quite frankly. His arm talent is there. It's exceptional, but you could definitely overdo the arm talent and force it into bad situations more often than not than if you ran the ball. We're a lot more physical with run plays because those just carry less risk than throwing the ball 30 to 40 times per game, obviously. They'll have more possession of the ball, and I think it'll make Josh Allen a lot more efficient going forward. He's able to keep Stefon Diggs around. I'm sure that makes him happy. I'm sure Stefon Diggs is a lot more at ease. But you never know, again, in the NFL. They could make a surprise trade if the package is there. But for now, it looks like the band is staying together. The dynamic duo of Diggs and Josh Allen looks to be staying together. And I will put a pin on that conversation. And I will transition now into another break in the show. And on the other side of the break, on the other half of this show, I will bring up what happened on franchise tag deadline day, what moves were made, what players were tagged, what players weren't tagged, and my thoughts on all of that, making sure you guys didn't miss any of the news that dropped yesterday. I'll have it all on here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, and the deadline for franchise tags was on Tuesday, yesterday, March 5th. That being a lot of these teams getting a lot of deals done. A lot of teams were under a lot of pressure to get these deals done with some of their star players. And I'm just going to go over a lot of them that I saw. I think I got most of them, but there was others that happened a little bit later than I did these notes, or some that just broke today that I'll try to also bring up and give you my thoughts on as well. And the day started really with a lot of releases and just some quick notes that I have here. The Panthers released tight end Hayden Hurst. The Jets released JioSaavn to save $5 million. And some of the bigger ones that came out later in the day were that the Dolphins released Jerome Baker and the Chargers releasing Eric Kendricks. For the Dolphins side of it, they weren't able to restructure Jerome Baker's contract in any way to get them under that salary cap. They're another team that has a lot of players as unrestricted free agents, and they really had to pick and choose who was worth keeping around with the amount of money that was being made. And Jerome Baker wasn't able to negotiate a restructured deal, so he'll be hitting free agency, and I'm sure he'll gain a lot of attention from various teams to acquire his services. I have seen a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers being one of those teams. They liked him a lot coming out of Ohio State, and now they have a chance to get him, but they have to restructure potentially that deal to fit under their cap because the Steelers don't have a lot of cap, so I'm sure they'll have to restructure him. And some of the bigger news, the Giants obviously decided not to tag Saquon Barkley. The Ravens, on the other hand, franchise tagged their defensive tackle, Justin Madubuike. This was expected. A lot of people knew that the Ravens couldn't afford to let him test free agency just because of the season that he was coming off of. He had 13 sacks as a defensive tackle this past season. That's the most by a Raven player in the last 9 years. So, your hands are tied there. You can't let that guy set 1 foot out the building and potentially lose him. So they put the tag on him. They're still going to negotiate for a new contract, but at least they'll have him for at least one more season and try to negotiate something with him. Another one that was pretty big, or that happened early on, was that the Texans re-signed their tight end Dalton Schultz, and it later came out that they also re-signed their kicker Kaimi Fairbairn to another long-term deal. I think it was $13 million around, or not $13 million, 3 years, $15 million for Kaimi Fairbairn. So he'll be sticking around. They made sure to keep Dalton Schultz to keep that offensive firepower, and C.J. Stroud, most of all, happy with a reliable weapon like Dalton Schultz was to him. And they still, with Saquon Barkley not being tagged, I'll harp on it again. I think that's a no-brainer for Saquon to go from the Giants to the Texans. Immediate success. I think it's a perfect match, but those rumors are still swirling. Something else that happened on the deadline was that the Bucs, arguably this was one of the more surprising ones for me, the Bucs tagged their safety Antoine Winfield, and a lot of reports had this trending in a positive direction that they were going to get a deal done before the deadline, but that obviously didn't happen. And Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport had it published on their social media that this was more so a placeholder for Antoine Winfield, just to make sure, again, he didn't have any chance of leaving. He didn't have any chance to talk to another team. They put the franchise tag on him, and still the sensation is that they'll get a deal done. This was just as a precaution, and it says a lot to me that they put it on Antoine Winfield as a precaution. It just shows the level of importance that they have in keeping him, because the contract negotiations were already going well, but they were so, I guess, scared, for a lack of a better term, that they could lose him if he tested free agency. They couldn't take that risk, and he's coming off another great season as well. He's slowly becoming that leader of that defense, more so now if they don't re-sign Levante David, and Devin White also seems out the door, so he's going to be the one stepping into that role. They couldn't afford to lose him. I expect them to get a deal done, a sign and then get a deal done sort of situation that has been occurring a lot. And But that was surprising that they franchise tagged him and weren't able to get anything done. In other news around the NFL, the other one, which was probably more surprising to me, and I'll get into this more on tomorrow's show or Friday's show in regards to all the questions I had after these deals. This was one of them. Why the Giants decided not to tag Xavier McKinney if they already were rumored to not be tagging Saquon Barkley. Xavier McKinney has been one of the more reliable, stable players and good draft picks that they've hit on in recent memory. They always draft these offensive tackles and they either don't pan out right away or they sort of lose hope in them right away. They're Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal were the ones in recent memory that they drafted, but now it seems like those guys are just bad all of a sudden. They dealt with injuries or they've not been the stalwarts that you need at the offensive tackle position, but it always seems like the Giants every year are drafting for an O-lineman. We have to get the O-line better. We have to protect the quarterback. It seems like that's been the strategy for the last 3 or 4 years, and they either don't get it right or they're just trying to move on, looking for a very fast success. And a lot of times it doesn't work like that, or they could be right and they just don't develop these guys as they should because these guys are very high prospects. Arguably, both of them were the best tackles in the class that year. And for them not to pan out, for the Giants to still harp on, fixing their offensive line, it is puzzling, but, Xavier McKinney was one that did pan out for them. He was a great draft pick for them. And, they didn't tag him. He was up for a contract extension. They decided not to do that. Now they're going to let him test free agency. And I just don't understand where the reasoning comes into that because, one, Antoine Winfield is most likely going to sign with the Bucs. So that, by default, will make Xavier McKinney the best, if not the top 2 best safeties available in free agency. And I'm sure if it came down to Xavier McKinney, if somebody offered him the same amount of money as the Giants did, he would more so be inclined to join another team that you could say values him more than the Giants did because they didn't tag him. They didn't go any further with the extension. And now another team comes knocking. I'm sure he'll be glad to join another team. And I just was very confused as to what the Giants, what Joe Schoen, and Brian Dable were thinking with that move. But, it happened. It's a fact now. And we're going to have to wait till the start of the new league year, to the official start of free agency. If he's one of the first ones taken off the board, I probably expect him to be. And that's where that stands. In other news, the Colts, they tagged Michael Pittman. Same reason, they couldn't let him get out the door. They say, their general manager says that it is trending in the right direction, but he had the best season of his career, so it made sense for them not to want to lose him potentially, with Anthony Richardson trying to get back some of that success that he had in his rookie season, derailed by concussions and medical stuff. He looks promising from all the games that I saw, so they want to help him keep his number 1 receiver around and help that development. The Bears also tagged their cornerback, Jalen Johnson. They also say that the deal is close to being done for an extension, but if he does play under the tag, it'll be almost $20 million worth of a 1-year deal if they're unable to get the extension done. But that's one of the priorities for the Bears and general manager Ryan Poles. He harped a lot on keeping Jalen Johnson, valuing him as much as they do. So that's another one that I think will probably get done sooner rather than later. And 2 of the bigger ones, the more no-brainer ones as well, Brian Burns and Josh Allen were tagged officially by the Panthers and the Jaguars. 2 of the premier young pass rushers that if they hit the market, they were not going to last more than a day or 2. I guarantee that. But the teams obviously saw that and valued them the same way. The Jaguars say that their deal with Josh Allen is close to being done. And they also released Rayshawn Jenkins their safety and their corner, Darius Williams, as well, making more room for a Josh Allen deal to be done. Also, Calvin Ridley's a free agent, so if they were to sacrifice one of them, it looks like it could be Calvin Ridley just to get the Josh Allen deal done. Josh Allen had a great year this past season, setting the franchise record for the Jaguars in sacks and, just this constant progression that they've seen out of him. They couldn't let him test the market. Same with Brian Burns. He is in a more delicate situation just because it's the Panthers and he might be looking for more success elsewhere and might not want an extension with them. Those talks could carry on a little bit later than a lot of people might expect, but I see it as, if they don't give him a good amount of money, I think I saw somewhere he might be asking for north of $26 million, around there. If they don't pay him that, I'm sure he'll not sign the franchise tag. We might have a holdout situation in place with Brian Burns. So different situations for two guys that play basically the same position but are in different spots with their teams. Other than that, the Lions re-signed Emmanuel Mosley. Their cornerback that they acquired from the San Francisco 49ers was coming back, actually now coming back from 2 ACL injuries after he came back from his first one this year during Week 5. He tore his other ACL, and now he's trying to come back from that. And the Lions valued him enough to give him at least a 1-year deal after devastating knee injuries. So he'll be staying in Detroit. The Patriots placed a transition tag on Kyle Duggar. That is around $13.8 million, and that allows them to match any offer that comes at Kyle Duggar in case another team offers the same amount. The Patriots have the obligation and the right to match that deal in order to keep Kyle Duggar. So there's a bit more security there. And to wrap it all up, just off of that Kyle Duggar deal, that means that the Patriots won't be tagging their offensive lineman, Mike Onwenu. He'll be a free agent. And like I mentioned before, the Jaguars released Darius Williams just to create more room for Josh Allen. All those are the moves that I saw happened. And just off of today, I'm pretty sure I saw Eagles release Avonte Maddox, one of their slot corners, dealing with a lot of injuries and had a $9 or $10 million cap hit, so it made sense for the Eagles to release him. He is still in talks with the Eagles about potentially signing him again, but for now, they have released him. And I'm trying to think of any other deal that I saw today that might have dropped before I came on here. I'm not thinking of any. None are coming to my head, but just to wrap this whole segment up, to bring up the players that are free agents because they weren't tagged, leaves it with Chris Jones, Christian Wilkins, Saquon, Josh Jacobs, Onwenu, Baker Mayfield, Calvin Ridley, and Xavier McKinney. All those players had the option to be tagged, but were not tagged, obviously. Their teams decided to let them test free agency. And Chris Jones, he's closer to Kansas City than leaving, but you definitely have players on here like a Calvin Ridley, a Baker Mayfield, Josh Jacobs, Christian Wilkins, most likely, that we could see them on different teams, and they'll definitely be taking offers from other teams for not only a good amount of money that they've earned, but for an opportunity to play, potentially for a better team and find themselves in a better situation than they're coming off of this past season. All interesting stuff, all stuff that is in development and will definitely speed up over the coming days. But with that, I will send this show to its last break, and on the other side of it, I'll bring you more Cowboys news. What did Dak Prescott say about him feeling attacked? What his reactions were to the latest Jerry Jones comments, and what my thoughts are on Dak Prescott saying all of this, finally speaking to the media this offseason. My thoughts coming after this break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. You're not going to want to miss it. Back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last segment of the show regarding the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, and all the comments that just seem to not stop when it comes to the Cowboys. Before I jump into what Dak said and what Jerry Jones said, I want to remind you guys one last time before this episode ends to please, if you have any questions, want to engage with me during the show, please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me at gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you're not watching and only listening, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Doing this makes it easier for me to see your questions, makes it able for me to read them on air, and it's always a better time, I think, when you guys are commenting, reacting to what I say. It's a big help for this show and all the shows across the network, and we always thank you guys immensely when you guys are able to do that with any of your questions. Going now into the last part of the show, the last segment, the Dallas Cowboys can't stop talking, and people can't stop talking about the Cowboys, which is a fact of media, of news nowadays. Jerry Jones has really been the prominent figure in the media now that Micah Parsons has kind of quieted down a little bit, and now you have their quarterback, Dak Prescott, appearing at a charity event this past Monday, and media obviously there following him, wanting to know his thoughts on what's been going down, what his contract situation's like, and what he thinks of all the comments that have been made about the Cowboys. And one of the things they asked him about was Jerry Jones's all-in comments. That's all we've heard, Jerry Jones saying, we're all in on this season. We're going to do whatever it takes to be all in on this season. It all comes down to this season, apparently, for the Cowboys. And before I give you Dak's reaction, Jerry actually walked back on his comments a little bit, kind of gave a back door to his comments and not hold so much weight. He said in a recent interview at the Combine that his words were, your definition of what is all in and mine might not be the same thing, but I'm trying to win games this year with my decisions, Jones said, according to Michael Gelkin of the Dallas Morning News. So, he's saying what I mean by all in might not be what you think all in means. Already, it's not an excuse, but it's just a clarification that, gives him an out if it doesn't turn out the way it's supposed to. And, going back to Dak, and they asked him what he thought of those comments on Monday, he spoke to the media and said, yeah, I've heard that one. I'm excited to see it, honestly. Prescott said, according to Garrett Podol of CBS Sports. And furthermore, in that interview, those questions, Dak said, I don't know. I can't say I've had talks with him about what is all in and how you plan on making those moves. So let's see. I'm excited about it. And then it all transitioned into contract talks and where he felt those negotiations were. His words were that he said he was definitely confident that a deal would get done this offseason, in contrast to what everyone else has been saying, that Dak's not going to get a deal this season. It looks like it's not going to happen with their cap restrictions and the kind of money that he's asking. But Dak feels the complete opposite. He thinks they'll be able to do it this season. And, from my point of view, seeing this, you can understand why Dak says that, why he would feel confident about it. The recent success in the regular season might be a good case to build for other quarterbacks. If other quarterbacks have this sort of season compared to if you're on the Dallas Cowboys, it looks more favorable to get that type of money, but it is unfair a little bit on Dak Prescott because he gets to play for the Dallas Cowboys, because he's always surrounded by the history of the Cowboys, the standard to live up to. It might not be fair to judge Dak on that merit just because he's part of the Cowboys, that he doesn't get the same treatment of other quarterbacks, but it is a privilege and a standard that comes with being part of the Dallas Cowboys, and people will say if you can't handle that, you might as well. You're obviously not the quarterback for this team. A lot of people have said that, and now that he's coming into a contract year, it's yet to be seen what the Cowboys will do. I'm sure whatever they do, it'll garner a lot of happy fans and a lot of very angry, disappointed fans, just depending on where you sit on Dak. But that's what he said on his contract. And moving further on that charity event, they asked Dak Prescott what he felt about the Cowboys culture. You know, he's a player, he's in it, he lives it. Compared to Jerry Jones, Jerry could say one thing, but he's not in the locker room interacting with these guys every single day for a lot of these days. So they asked Dak on the culture, and he said, yeah, the culture is high, honestly, and the culture is great from my standpoint. My point is that something I've bragged on and took pride in, so if there's questions of that or concerns on that, I feel attacked. And that got a lot of reactions from a lot of people in the media. You know, some people might think, how could you feel attacked? It's reasonable to feel attacked. It's reasonable for other people to say that, you know, if you're feeling attacked, is there reason for you to feel attacked? Is there a reason why people are criticizing you so much that you get to this point? It goes back to that standard, like I was saying, with Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. If you play for a team like this, the Cowboys, whatever they do, it gets times by 10. Anything that they do, good or bad. And with Dak not living up to the standard and him being a big part of not living up to the standard in the playoffs, they haven't won a playoff game in 25 years. It's that they haven't been to the NFC Championship. And just on that, to sit here, if you're Dak, and say that you feel attacked almost as a victim of harsh criticism, you know, I don't know what you expected being this quarterback. And I think by now he knows that. And, you know, he's trying to say the right thing, stick up for the guys, and say that the culture is great. But I just don't think attacked was the right thing that he should have said. I think he could have worded it differently, just simply say that he didn't agree with it. Most people would have said, and if I was in Dak's position, I would have said, you know, everyone that's criticizing isn't in the locker room. That's probably what he should have said and what most people do say. But to say he feels attacked, I think it makes people feel a certain type of way that, you know, they are not letting him off the hook for saying that he feels attacked. And a lot of them will justify attacking the Cowboys because they are so big, so well known, that the past results that they have gotten aren't able to withstand the mediocrity that's been surrounded with the Cowboys a lot. And you could say that's ownership, that's the players, that's the coaching. Regardless of what it is, something has to be done, and people are at that breaking point, like I've mentioned in other shows, that, you know, they might be getting a little hostile, a bit more assertive with what they say, because they need to see a reaction from this team, because they're too good to keep putting out these performances in the playoffs. And Micah Parsons has harped on it, getting new people in here to change that culture, but that kind of pushes back on it and says that it's great from his standpoint, and we're going to have to see where that goes from there. And if you're Dak and you guys really want to do something about it, you know, how do you get people to stop asking these questions? How do you get people to stop badgering you about the culture, the performances, why things aren't going your way? The simplest thing that you can say and do is just go out there and perform on the field. Perform the way that this roster kind of makes everyone perform because of the talent that they have, and so on and so forth. They have an all-world wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb. They had a decent running back with Tony Pollard, an amazing O-line, and a defense that's great, led by Micah Parsons. DeMarcus Lawrence was there. Stephon Gilmore stepped up. Trayvon Diggs was hurt, but he's also been there around it. There are other pieces that still need to improve, don't get me wrong, but they have a lot more than a lot of teams are working with, quite honestly. Just off the top of my head, the Steelers, they made the playoffs, and nobody's really criticizing the Steelers as much as the Dallas Cowboys, in part because the Dallas Cowboys could be bigger in terms of a media standpoint and the kind of attention they gain, but also because their performances have been, the Steelers have seen a lot more recent success than the Cowboys have, and it just goes back to that drought extending over this period. A breaking point was coming inevitably, and I think we're getting closer and closer to that. With Dak being on his final year, Mike McCarthy being on his final year, we could be seeing something differently, some consequences potentially happening after this season. And just on top of that, off of the whole contract situation with Dak and just thinking out loud here, if you're Dak and like anybody with a job and trying to figure out money and things like that, can you really expect Dak to try and do something about the culture, about this team, invest a lot in this team, if there's questions about him and if he deserves the kind of money that he believes he deserves? If you have people questioning that over and over again, how does that stop Dak from thinking, this team doesn't value me? If they really valued me and wanted me to stick around for a while and really invest into this culture, they would pay me. And if they don't pay me and still have doubts about me, why would he invest all this time into trying to fix a culture that he might not be in come next season or 2 seasons down the line? Now, that seems pretty unlikely, pretty extreme to some extent, but it is a reality somewhere where Dak might not be on this team and he might feel a certain type of way if his contract isn't settled and people still question him and his play. He might just had enough of it at one point and just not invest in the Cowboys and want to just move on if people don't value him here and try to find a team elsewhere that does value him and gives him the amount of money he's rumored to be asking for. And, it all seems to be simple as for the Cowboys to just win a playoff game. They just need to win a playoff game, and it seems that all of this will go away. And that's a question I want to pose to you guys. I don't think we'll have enough time to get into it, but, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think the Cowboys just need one playoff win to get a lot of this attention off their back? In my opinion, I think it's always going to be there just because they're the Cowboys. For them to always be in the playoffs, I think is already a given. And to just win one, I think it'd be nice for a change of late with their recent playoff success. But I think just going deeper into the playoffs, building, improving year on year, that's where we'll see people kind of ease up on the criticism, ease up on attacking all the players for not performing. If they do perform and we see improvement year after year after year, going maybe further in the playoffs, 2 years go by, you make the divisional, another year goes by, you're in the championship, consecutive years, I think that's going to do a lot more rather than, simply saying they just need to win a playoff game and taste success once and then it'll go away. I think that's unrealistic because of who the Cowboys are, what they stand for, and what Jerry Jones has kind of made this sort of organization into, always being talked about, always being in the news. He's kind of built that, and now you reap some of the benefits of it, and you also see some of the downsides now more than ever with the players receiving all this criticism. Is it warranted? Is it deserved? That's up to you guys to decide, but that's where Dak stands, what he said about feeling attacked, and what my thoughts were on him saying that. It created a lot of controversy, and I'm sure we're going to get more reactions as the day goes on regarding the Cowboys. They're always in the news, and it is good to talk about it. It's good for me to talk about it on here. And it's interesting as well because a lot of people have a lot of things to say on the Cowboys, and nothing is really decided until they prove it on the field. So that's where that is, and that's where I'm going to leave this show. That's all the time I have for you guys today on today's episode. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to you guys for tuning into this episode and for everyone listening as well. Please remember to follow and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content. Not just sports, there's a lot of other stuff on the network as well. But if you do want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for more live shows, some YouTube shorts that I put out there every day, and individual segment videos if you couldn't catch all of the live show, or if you just wanted to rewatch one segment. It's all on there for you guys to go back and watch. But as always, I've been your host, Manny Maradiegue. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. for more NFL and football conversations. Take care, guys. I will see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.